decisions or give guidance?
Sure.
So we're starting on page 22, policy recommendations.
So a couple of things, just standing right here so that's not right now.
Why don't you come over to the other side then?
There are a couple of things that just about how it's organized, first of all. Each one of the individual proposals that was contained in the September report are now on an individual page, and that was just for simplicity's sake as we were working on it as a staff to just be able to look at them each individually at a time. But overall, it's roughly the same length as was in the September report. What we tried to do was standardize the format in which each one of the specific proposals is discussed, and trying to do it in a way that is similar to how the governor's office has been asking state agencies to develop their budget and policy proposals. Primarily, the focus is on articulating an outcome for each one of the proposals, what you're trying to achieve, and then identifying some metrics by which the governor's office can track, or whatever body is going to exist to carry on the work of the task force can track progress towards achieving that metric. So we tried to break that out here in an easy to digest way, and the task force members have thoughts about if this is the right way to describe that. We can certainly talk about that, but we tried to have that, use that model for each one of the proposals. And so they're, I believe, in the same order that they appeared in the September report. And I think for the purposes today, there are several points within each, throughout the recommendation section, where there's a little note, and the first one is a good example at the bottom in the metrics section for the increased funding for public libraries and schools. Down at the bottom there's a question. And that was sort of our working notes amongst the staff of where we had a question or maybe looking for some more direction from the task force. Another good example would be, and Joanne and I were talking about this over lunch, on the Dig Once proposal, there's a...
Which page?
Which is on page 28, I'm sorry. Right now we have question marks in the estimated cost section. Mm-hmm. And that's a point of discussion for the task force because there are a couple of different ways that you could look at this type of proposal. On the one hand, similar to what Jim Keller was saying earlier, was that this is a proposal that could not have a cost to the state. It could be purely a directive to state agencies to work together, and there could not necessarily be a cost associated with that. However, if the task force feels that there should be a person in the Office of Broadband Development or somewhere else within state government to coordinate this activity, then the cost of that would be the cost of paying for that person to exist within state government. And so questions like that, I think we can take the answer and then do the cost estimate, if you will, about what that would cost. Like it's, Department of Commerce can supply what it costs to pay the average Department of Commerce employee, and you can put that in as a cost estimate for the task force's final report. But those little question marks or notes within the narrative are spots where we felt like we needed a little bit more direction from the task force to complete the report. The last thing that I would say, and then we can start to get into each one of them, are that as you go through each one of these, they start to get a little bit shorter. That I think is reflective of the fact that some of these are very well articulated. The task force spent a lot of time talking about specific ones. Some of these other ones, we maybe didn't have as much information about necessarily maybe the examples, the program that the task force was basing the idea off of, or what the goal or how the specific proposal would advance the state towards achieving the state's broadband goals, and how we thought that might work. And so that might be a good place for some discussion. One of those, I think, is the public-private partnership model to make funding available for technology training on page 32, which was based on the Washington, D.C. Digital Inclusion Grant Program example. In the incentives work group last meeting, people were sort of looking around at each other, and no one quite knew where that example had come from or how that program really worked. So that's why there's not a whole lot of detail in that specific proposal. So if task force members have more information about something like that, we can get it in and flush that one out and make it a little bit more robust. So,
great. Any questions for Peter? It's very helpful just to, so I don't I don't necessarily see us keeping this formatted, each one on a single page. We might put it into some sort of grid or way of reading it differently, but for the purposes of today, this is an easy way to read each one. I think we have about 10 to go through. I do think that the other thing is that if there's anything that we want to take off the list after looking at it again today, that helps in prioritization, because, you know, it'll accommodate making more quickly that the good use of the funds that have been set aside, at least as a temporary hold, within the budget for usage.
And I would just add from the example, from our experience going through the budget process for the rest of the department thus far, a lot of the questions that have come from the governor's office are really focused on, they're coming at it from the standpoint of how do we know that we're going to get what we're going to buy, and we're going to spend money, and approaching the state's budget from this more private sector kind of mentality about what are we, if we're going to invest dollars, how do we know we're going to achieve what we're buying?
Right.
And to the extent that, to go through your comments, Madam Chair, to the extent that the task force isn't able to say, this policy proposal is going to move us towards achieving the statutory outcome, I would suggest to you that that might be instructed to you about whether or not it should be in the final report, because I can tell you that when this goes to the governor's office, they're going to ask that question.
Right.
We can't answer it ourselves here.
So could you give us the example that you and I were talking about during lunch of how other states do, the one where there's questions about the
Sure.
tax incentive page?
So page 25.
Yeah.
So this was the one where we were still waiting for the Department of Revenue to try to provide some cost estimates. And what they came back with late yesterday were a series of questions looking for some more direction from the task force members about how you want to proceed and what outcome you're really looking for. And so just to give you an example, they broke out the Wisconsin and the Mississippi examples, which are actually different programs, trying to achieve the same goal, but they're very different structures. The Wisconsin one, for example, the income tax credit, it was a one-time tax credit that was only available for a finite amount of time, worked in conjunction with the sales tax exemption. Their Department of Commerce had to certify that people who were to whom the tax benefit was going to accrue were actually doing something that qualified them for the tax credit. And there was a cap on the total amount of money that was available as part of it. And so the questions from revenue were, do you want to structure a credit along these same parameters? Do you want it to have a cap? Do you want it to have to require certification of the state agency? Do you want it to be in conjunction with the sales tax credit as well? I think what we talked about doing is trying to put those questions together in a more usable format and maybe send them out later, because it's going to be hard to go through them one by one here. But I think that's the overall question above all the sub-questions for revenue was, how do you want to target the benefit that you're trying to incent, or the behavior that you're trying to incent through this tax credit? And is that going to move the state towards achieving statutory goals? And if you can articulate how you want it to be structured, and if it's going to move the state forward, then we can price out what it's going to cost in Minnesota. But we need more information about how you want to design it from the task force before we can. I think another good example of where we might have some discussion today about how to articulate that a little bit better is actually on page 31, which is the proposal to facilitate public-private partnerships to deliver free discounted computers to K-12 students in Minnesota. We have a number of examples in Minnesota of programs from organizations like Comcast that do that already, that do that type of work already. But when we were looking back at the materials that we had, what we didn't have notes on was whether or not the task force had decided what the state's role was going to be in what we meant by facilitating those programs. And additionally, how facilitating such programs would move the state forward towards achieving its broadband goals. And so to the extent the task force is able to do that, we can put it in the report, and I think that's going to be speaking the language of the governor's office.
Thank you, it's very helpful. I think what I propose is that we do a quick spin through these, and we try to do a very